Why is it that the ketogenic diet works amazingly for some people, yet others cannot stick to it? But drugs like Ozempic seem to work every time. I think I know why. After reading headlines like this, where some people on Ozempic lose the desire to drink, and scientists are asking why. It wasn't the first time I asked this question. I saw this in patients who were struggling to change behaviors, and when they used drugs that manipulated their endocrine system, more than just their desire to eat was changing. Brains are developed to find enjoyment, and this list shows where most of us get enjoyment from. Friendships, sex, competition, whether that's any type of performance where you excel and others don't always get there. Service, storytelling, eating, and that thrill seeking are all places where our brain makes dopamine. When you add trauma during that time of development, your brain finds one place that it tends to get most of the enjoyment. And that neural mapping of your brain carries with you throughout a lifetime. For example, if you drink alcohol right after a traumatic event in your teenage years, you learn that your brain dissociates when you add a bunch of alcohol and you don't have to think about that trauma or that path in life that you don't like. Let's take a closer look at how that dopamine is linked inside your brain. This example is looking at a neurotransmitter that's GABA. It comes across that synapse and sends a signal downstream where dopamine is then triggered. These two neurohormones or endocrine processes in your brain are linked. That recycling of hormones guarantees that your brain is primed and ready for the next stimulus. You are never empty of these hormones. You are recycling them and use them again. Now let's add an external source like alcohol. Alcohol fits into that GABA receptor and it stimulates the dopamines downstream. It binds tighter and harder, and you'll notice this dopamine stimulus is much higher than what the normal, natural GABA stimulation was. As your natural GABA looks for a parking spot while alcohol is parked there, it's not strong enough to kick out the alcohol and bind instead, and your signal to replenish and make more GABA grows weaker because alcohol is overtaking that signal. The same thing happens downstream. As you drink alcohol, it used to send a major stimulus. And now the amount of dopamine produced when alcohol binds is much slower. So it's taking more drinks of alcohol to feel that dissociation or that stimulus. Overall, the brain becomes depleted in the GABA and the dopamine, so that when you take away that stimulus, when you stop drinking, patients will describe that period as depressive or a place where their brain just doesn't feel right. And indeed, it isn't acting right. We have several other molecules in our brain that does the same thing. This one represents what opiates do. Here's what acetylcholine and its mimicker nicotine does. This one is serotonin, and we have the hallucinogens that act a lot like that one. This one is glutamate and its PCP analog. And finally, we have the endocannabinoids and the THC or marijuana-based stimulus. In the end, they all stimulate that increased amount of dopamine, and then they fatigue the brain and you deplete the storage overall. What's most important is that if you look at that development when your brain was learning to be rewarded, if food was your major stimulus, the major way you learn to feel good, you will link that dopamine surge to the consumption of carbohydrates. As we look at all the different ways that you can stimulate the brain, alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana are classically known for pushing that dopamine increased in the brain, and then the natural depletion of those neurotransmitters the longer they use that. The connection between your gut and your brain and the satisfaction for food is mitigated through multiple endocrine processes. But it's specifically the GLP-1 process that has swept across the internet and across the prescription pads of doctors that are helping patients with weight loss. This slide shows all of the different ways that GLP-1 works naturally. So GLP-1 is the hormone that is being overstimulated in drugs like Ozempic. And it causes weight loss because it certainly decreases their appetite, slows down their gastric emptying, and manipulates how insulin is being produced and released from the pancreas. And by golly, it does cause weight loss. But why is it causing a decrease in these other maladaptive behaviors that are linked to dopamine? So this study took a closer look at what's happening inside the brains of mice who are given a product that acts a lot like Ozempic. This product, which is called EX4, has a longer half-life, but the impact on what it's doing to dopamine is very telling. This graph is specifically looking at the cells in the nucleus accumbens and how well it produces dopamine. These first two lines show that the control group, which had saline injected, and then those with the EX4, the one that looks a lot like Ozempic, had really no rise in dopamine. They then added cocaine, and as expected, their nucleus accumbens exploded with the production of dopamine. The final line shows what happened to the mice who had Ozempic on board and then were given cocaine. And you'll see quite the reduction in the production of dopamine in that area of the brain. Although this is a study of mice and they're looking at cocaine and not carbs, it certainly helps me to sort out why am I seeing a reduction in these maladaptive behaviors that patients really want to do a better job at, but it seems their brain is hijacked to do the wrong thing. I have many patients who have struggled with obesity and done extreme measures to try and course correct. They have mutilated their GI system in hopes to eat less and have satiety earlier. And yet they keep gaining back the weight. Those patients frequently have a trauma during their brain development that led to the use of carbohydrates and often other substances that they use to feel better. As we try and rewire their brain, putting the healthy options in front of them, putting them on a ketogenic diet, finding a support group, having other areas where their brain makes dopamine turns out to be very important in the longevity of their recovery from carbohydrates. I haven't prescribed this medicine, but if I would start by making sure the patients are using other areas of development in their life to enrich that dopamine production, because the question of, once you get them feeling better, is there a way to get off of it? And if I do stop it, do they have those other neural pathways restored in their life? Or will they relapse back to their drug of choice, carbohydrates? If you're considering the use of Ozempic, check out this next video where I compare the weight loss from Ozempic to that with autophagy. I'll see you there.